We are the SnoKing Beekeepers Association. I'm Eli Ocheltree. I'm presenting on the annual conference of the Washington State Beekeepers Association, of which we are a member club here in this Snohomish-King County area. I'm just going to cover highlights, and it's just my perception, my view of them. Just me, a journeyman beekeeper in Snohomish County. There's going to be a PDF that accompanies this, and these are the talks that are on YouTube that you can access. And this is kind of nice because it gives you the length. Some of them are longer. If you're familiar, if you're comfortable running things at a high speed setting, I don't think you should run me at high speed. But there are really slow talkers that you can change the speed on the settings and run them and cut this time down. But just so you're prepared for how much. Some of these are excellent presentations, and they were worth every minute of the time watching them. There was a hobbyist track, a science track. I'm going to leave this in the video that we're recording now. I'm also going to have a PDF available that you can get to when you join our group discussion page on Facebook. We're going to skip over some of the talks. There's one on the Asian giant hornet, the murder hornet. Okay, we're all tired of that, right? And there's lots of information out there. The Washington State Department of Agriculture, that's easy to access. There was more talk about Varroa, and we are so tired of the V word. I know we are. We have to talk about it. We have to face up. We are grown-ups, I think most of us, and we have to face Varroa as a challenge. A lot of the question and answer sessions I'm not going to talk about, and there are presenters that you frequently hear. Randy Oliver is a very popular presenter. Dewey Caron is a professor emeritus now at the Oregon State University. And Ramesh Sagili is very available too. He's at the Oregon State University working in the bee labs and department there. Randy Oliver, I have to put this in, and I hope this isn't going to get me in trouble. He is what I call a presenter who's an easy listening experience. He's well known as a presenter, presents on beekeeping, and he's well liked by hobbyists. However, I never recommend any of his videos, almost never, because he throws out ideas. He just tosses them out. He does random research citations. If you go to the website that he has, scientificbeekeeping.com, it's chaotic. He'll propose an idea, he'll reverse it, he'll discard it, he'll go back to it, and if you try to follow his website and even his beekeeping career, beekeepers tend to get confused. He is a very interesting person to talk to. Seriously, I would sit down and talk to him anytime. But when you are, I keep admitting people, sorry. Nope. Okay. When you just get too confused. People hear him say something once and they don't understand that he just made a suggestion. I think he would even probably admit that if you talk to him. But he confuses people, so I don't recommend him for beginning. If you get to intermediate, you'll probably be more comfortable listening to him. There is something for everybody, though, left in the highlights that I want to cover. A lot of talk about nutrition, including those fungal extracts. Just as they're good for people's immune systems, there is a lot of interest in those fungi and the extracts from them helping out bee immune systems. Queens, quite a bit of talk about queens. Beginners aren't as interested in queens, but by the time you're into your second or third year, you're thinking, how hard could it be to raise queens? Well, there's a couple of really good talks on that. There's for the botanist, the gardener, the ecologist, there's all kinds of talks on forage and habitat and pesticides. And actually, they all sort of come in and link together. The chemistry, particularly there's a lot of talk in nutrition about sterols, polyphenols. It was brought back memories since I have a degree in biochemistry. And it was really interesting to hear what people are talking about that I just did it in a dry chemistry book. Much more interesting the way the presenters present it. There's graphs and research data if you're into that. And if you want to kind of leap over it, You know, you're in control of the clicker, right? Especially on YouTube videos. There's the easy listening type things. There's some beautiful scenery. I love looking at pictures of bee forage and bees, right? And there's always that concern, can we reduce the chemical treatments for varroa? Everybody wants to do that. And there is some very practical hive management and overwintering success presentations. Two presenters are new to me, Jennifer Short and Zach Lamas. And I thought they were both really good and worth following to see if they do more presentations. The whole conference started out with an introduction and then an overview of where the WSU, which hosts the Agricultural Extension Service for the state. They are the Agricultural Extension Service University. And they are really into bee breeding and genetics, artificial insemination. They do queen raising and queen rearing and queen inseminating workshops out there on the east side of the mountains. Steve Shepard is one of the professors very involved in that. And Sue Colby is actually internationally known for her work with collecting semen from around the world, especially with carniolans and colder weather bees. She's one of the few times that I would really listen to people who are saying they're interested in getting a different strain of bee that does better in this climate. I don't know about locally bred, but the carniolans, the Caucasians and such were meant for a colder region than the Italifornians that we keep buying in our nukes and packages. And I call them the Italifornians because they have nice production and docility of the Italians, and they raise brood. They love the big families, but they come from California up to this damp, cold western Washington area. Queens. Sue talks on the queens. That's what that is her specialty. But Zach Lamas also talks on requeening, a good talk. And a lot of it's on hive management too. You can't raise queens or requeen and risk your most valuable player, sort of like in chess, I guess. Your most valuable player, or in football, your VIP, MVP, most valuable player. Okay, same thing. Your management has to be good, and they talk about management in that relationship. Honeybee management in general. Jennifer Short, I had never heard give an entire presentation. I was very impressed. She's up at Camino Island. Get her information, and if you're interested, I definitely will listen to more presentations by her. Zach Lamas, if he does more too. Dewey Caron, he's professor emeritus, and he's a nice guy, and what he says is important. It's just he didn't have that zing. Sorry, but you get evaluated a little bit on whether you got the zing. Nutrition. There was a lot on nutrition and forage. And not just, they tell us, take the little pollinator packet and go out and sprinkle it. And if you get the plants to come up, your honeybees never go near them. Have you ever noticed that? Anybody tried that? Okay. Pollinators, especially native pollinators, love a huge variety. Honeybees select. They're picky in a lot of ways. They like diversity, but quite often they will go right past that carefully planted seed crop that you put in that you thought they'd be interested in, because over how many yards over, there's something they really, really like. Higher nectar, certain type of pollen they like. So there was a whole talk that I'm just going to refer to quickly. Tim Hyatt is the man who is sort of a lobbyist for Washington State Beekeepers Association. He's responsible for that gross negligence, willful misconduct clause that I mentioned that limits our liability just having bees. So people can't just sue us randomly and frivolously. And his talk was on the recommendations that are now before the Washington State Legislature. And they're very detailed and they're very interesting. If you want people to plant pollinator habitat, he goes into a lot of ways that you could use roadsides. You could say every public landscape project has to have 25% something for pollinators. There's so many ways to work it in. And he's interesting. I'll talk about him later. He made it much more interesting than you would have thought it was. Andony methylopolis, Oregon pollinator protection plan. They've been working on theirs, and theirs are slightly different for Oregon State. But he has a lot of talk about exact plants. So his is very, very that way. Tim Hyatt's is very how he got everybody to talk to everybody, how you get pesticide applicators to sit down and not get into fights with the beekeepers who believe their bees are getting poisoned, or the native pollinators who really don't want them around. And getting these people to talk was really wonderful, his explanation of it. Ramesh Sagili, he made a quick mention of supplemental pollen forage for specialty crop growers, partly because he works where Andony methylopolis works. And there was an interesting slide of bloom times in Jennifer Short's presentation. Fungi, that is really big now in bee talks and bee research. Jennifer Hahn did a great explanation of how she did it, how she did her experiment. That'll be fun to cover. And Nicholas Nager, he got a lot into the chemistry and how to feed the fungal extracts and how they're working on that. Forage kept coming up again and again. I think I repeated myself there. Okay. And all of this seemed to overlap. I was surprised at how much overlap there was. Although the question answer sessions are kind of confusing, and there were a couple, like I said, you get to hear these people talk all the time. You will frequently hear Randy Oliver talk, for example. He's often the keynote speaker too. But it was interesting. Honeybees and native pollinators don't actually overlap in some ways that much on the forage, which was one of the things that kept coming up. So I sort of tried to show that with a little Venn diagram there. But when you're getting into how does all this, anything about forage benefit the commercial beekeepers and such, it's very important to remember, what do we tell you to look for to know whether or not the queen's laying and whether there's brood? What's the thing that we always drill home in beginner class? You look to see if the bees are bringing in pollen. And it's not that all bees need protein throughout their lives, but they need a lot of pollen when they're raising brood and when they're gearing up in the spring and when they're trying to maintain that going into the nectar flow, and then they might back off. That's one sign of dearth, right? But if you don't see that pollen going in, if that pollen isn't out there available, they can't raise the maximum number of brood that they would like to. And oddly enough, when you put hives out for pollination, if they haven't had enough pollen, and if the pollen isn't nutritional enough, they're not raising brood. If they're not raising brood, they won't forage for pollen. You actually, and that is why in the pollination contracts, when a grower pays for so much per hive, in the contract is how many frames of brood are in there and a laying queen. So all of it comes full circle around. It's all related. Research benefits, it often seems like commercial people are getting the lion's share. The native bees, those people, they have a different type of research they're really looking for, like getting a baseline ID of how many native species we've got in Western Washington. Do we have 400, 600, or more species of native bees? Actually, we don't have a good baseline study. Great citizen science project if anyone's looking to set one up. The small-scale beekeeper, well, we can benefit some from commercial, although there's at least one study in here I go, what does this have to do with us? And it probably doesn't have much, because we do approach things differently. And just as we say in the beekeeping classes on the how-to, you don't have to do everything a commercial beekeeper does when you're a hobbyist. And if you're in between, you may have to decide what you want to do. I think everyone's in. Good. So, one of the first speakers in the two-day conference was Steve Shepard, and he was talking about Washington State University's breeding program, which they've been working on for years. In the upper left-hand corner, this is Sue Kobe, who has 2 talks in this conference, and she's really interesting. What she's doing there is collecting semen, And generally, actually, she's quite happy to show you and has videos of how to collect semen from drones, you know. And it's very interesting. She really loves her subject. Cryogenic storage, of course, means the liquid nitrogen. Semen can be stored for a long period of time, and other cells too, but semen is especially easy. We have the 1922 quarantine on adult bees being brought into the United States unless you have special permits and approvals from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and I don't know how many other pieces of paper and red tape. So bringing something like semen in is a lot easier, and it does control for a lot of pathogens, not all, but it does cut down what you might be bringing in addition to the genetic material that you're looking for. So I think it's Steve Shepard that does this talk, and he goes through some of the species. So if you've been hearing about the Carniolans, the Caucasians, and the Italians, and you're wondering, did they come from different places? Yes. And he goes through that. He goes through a roadmap. Fascinating. If that's your interest, and there's something for everybody in this conference. Now jumping to Sue Covey, I just showed you a picture of her. Here she is harvesting, and this is a drone, and here she is harvesting the semen by squeezing a certain way, and and she's showing you the bulb there of that contains the actual semen. And then she talks on about how she is bringing in semen from like the Carniolans, and even I think she's bringing in some Italian too. Caucasian, I'm not sure if she's bringing that in or not. In recent years, we've had Caucasian and Russian bee genetics being brought in. I assume through the semen, since we still have the basic ban on the import of adult bees. Fascinating to listen to. Don't have time to do, I mean, she's got years, I don't know how many years of work on this. The full name of her talk was Successfully Managing Various Queen Issues. Not just requeening, but how to introduce a queen, how to bank a queen, how to find a virgin, what to do about laying workers, how to get quality control. In the spring, we are somewhat laughed at in this area because we'll pay $40, $45 for any queen we can get. But the reason why is that our weather can delay any queen rearing attempts in much of Western Washington. So they have to be brought in, and there's costs involved in that. And this last year was bad, especially rainy spring. So she talks about how the conditions, the hive management and everything is going to influence that queen's reproductive capacity and her performance later. There is a big problem with queens not lasting. There are people who don't even believe in letting them live beyond 2 years. I've actually heard of commercial beekeepers who said just requeen every year. Solves a lot of problems. You always have a young queen. But for the hobbyist, I'm not sure. It would be nice to go back to really good conditions, get the right size queen, full ovarial development or spermatheca where she stores the sperm. That organ develops. She has the capacity to store that semen and keep it alive for however many years she is a laying queen, because she only mates once. It's an unusual phenomenon, even in animals, not unknown though. And her pheromones, directing the hive, holding everything together by her contribution to the pheromones. She talks about how do you know if you're queenless or not. That's always a neat topic in beginning beekeeping classes. I don't have time to really cover it, but I stuck it here, and I'll see what I can do on the PDF. Maybe I can just do the slides in PDF format. Here's another one of hers. She doesn't skip the drones. They often don't get discussed enough, but they are important. There's thousands of them per hive, though, compared to the few queens that a hive might produce in a year naturally, although you can raise queens and get more. I'm going to move on with requeening, even like her presentations were both wonderful, to Zach Lamas, who is the only person I think who doesn't have his PhD yet that presents at this conference. But he has a really great way he presents his information. For example, he starts out saying, why is beekeeping so hard to master? Why does it have such a high failure rate and a high frustration rate? And people sometimes don't come take their beginning beekeeper class until their second or third year of the bees failing. And some come the first year and they still fail because you still miss something. Why is it so hard? And he says, it's not like milking a cow. And he uses milking a cow and he goes and he explains this. And I felt so much better when he explained this. And every beginning beekeeper should feel good when you listen to how he explains it. He says the problem is beekeeping, you don't repeat a task until maybe a whole year later. And then the conditions changed. If you're going to make a split, okay, and you're going to do it in the spring, but the weather's different. And that's a whole year since maybe the last time you did a split to prevent a swarm. He says, if you look at it like milking cows, you go out and you milk that cow twice a day and you get it right, or else you have lots of repetition and there's a reward or a consequence immediately. You know if you did it right or wrong. Think about mite treatments. We don't know if our mite treatments are really working or not unless we do a lot of monitoring. And even then, sometimes it doesn't seem to have enough effect. But milking that cow, you get milk out or you don't get milk out. And the milking has to be done or she'll get udder infections, I'm sure. Then he goes on with his different methods of how to introduce a queen. And a lot of this still has to do with management and such. How to pick one up. He actually spends some time showing you how to pick one up and talking about it. This is something we don't have enough videos out there, I don't think, on YouTube of good practical things like that. He shows you an easy method to set up a nuke. Using the queen excluder that I always say in beginner class, don't use a queen excluder the first year for excluding a queen, except when you're doing certain techniques. And he does this technique where he gets all the frames that he wants to put in the nuke. The 5 frames that you see here, he puts them on top of a queen excluder, on top of all the bees in the lower box. Queen can't come up, but if he has brood in these 5 frames, if you remember what brood pheromone does, if there's open brood in those 5 frames, it's like they are screaming, take care of me, feed me, warm me, how could you ever leave me? And so all you've got to do is put those 5 frames there and then cover it up. You can do this in the evening, he said, come back the next morning and you will have it filled with bees, nurse bees, the young bees that you want. And you didn't do a lot of messy shaking. And anybody who's ever done a split, you're going to fall in love with his way to do it. I like his way to do it. He worked with Mike Palmer, and it could be part of why he has such great techniques.